It's a come to Jesus moment for the runaway media. Of course, I'm talking about this Trump assassination attempt. We now know the name of the shooter. Welcome back to the channel, Culture Confederacy here. It's Sunday night. We're just going to do this in one take. So a lot to get to here. And this is a channel where there are no fancy graphics, epic soundtracks, pretty boy camera angles. It's you, me, my smartphone, the news of the day, as we preserve great art, music, history, and culture. Now, as much as I think we should get rid of the presidency, and as much as I can't stand either party, I would be remiss in not doing my public service duty here and saying that there's no need for violence, political violence. And I really mean it. Unlike some of these people I see on TV, these Democrats who have had this come to Jesus moment. Have you seen this? So Donna Brazile is crying on This Week with George stepping on us. Bernie Sanders, I think, was on Meet the Press, Treat the Depressed. And he's saying there is no room for political violence. Now, this is a real scream, considering what happened in 2020 with all these riots. But we're not for political violence. But your side looted and rioted back in 2020. Okay. So here's what we know. Here's what we know at this hour. So Trump's ear was grazed by a bullet. Now, apparently there were 2 or 3 shots fired from a distance, apparently from a rooftop. They also found explosive in this suspect's car, who was killed by law enforcement Secret Service at the scene. So Trump is grazed in the ear, and they shield Trump, surround him. And at one point he's asking for his shoes. Let me find my shoes. Then he emerges. He's got a bloodied ear, and his fist is in the air. Fight, fight, fight. And everyone's chanting, USA, USA, USA. That will be one of the greatest political moments in history. And I didn't vote for Trump. But the optics of that, and I'll tell you why Democrats are scared. Because they saw this before with JFK. They saw this with RFK. Now, in those situations, unfortunately, JFK and RFK were killed. So this is all too real for the Democrats. But I just think it's a hoot that they're gonna say there's no room for political violence, and yet, you know, here they were engaging in political violence in 2020, if you want to call it that, looting and rioting in these different cities, Minneapolis. So as a result of all this, the RNC is going to be beefing up security during this week's convention in Milwaukee. Now, there was a funny moment, and it really plays into this thing I've been talking about of ditching the presidency, or rethinking this thing we call the presidency. And that's when they tried to shield Trump, surround Trump, get him on the ground. As he's getting back up, they move the lectern to the podium, and the Trump campaign sign is like all shifted up one side or the other. It's an illusion, folks. This whole idea of the office of the presidency, it's an illusion. This thing has gone far afield from what its original intent was. Basically, the president in the beginning was supposed to be like an ambassador, like a prime minister. But I think in this day and age, when you have more educated people than you did back then, let's say in the 1700s or even the early to mid 1800s, it's become an archaic institution. I mean, if you're going to keep the presidency, branch it out. Have maybe 3 or 4 people in this thing called the presidency. You want more representation, as I said before in a previous video, then stretch the Congress out, where it represents this part of the United States, let's say the North, the South, the Midwest, out West. That way you have more representation. Again, with more people who are better educated today than they were in the 1700s, at a time when only white men with land could vote. You know, it would make more sense to have more representation, but at that time, the population was much smaller. So go figure. But getting to the suspect here. Now, we do know that there was one person killed during this incident. 50-year-old attendee Corey Comparatori, I think it is. And he was a former fire chief of Buffalo Township, and 2 others were injured. I think they were sent to the hospital. So as I said before, first there were 2 or 3 shots, I believe it was, that were fired from a rooftop, nearby rooftop. They're saying 130 yards away, and there's footage of this. Footage of what appears to be the shooter on a rooftop. So according to the Wall Street Journal, authorities found explosives or explosive devices in Crook's car. His name is Thomas Matthew Crooks is the suspect here. 20 years old. 20 years old. And he graduated from Bethel Park High School in 2022. I believe Bethel Park is it's a suburb of Pittsburgh. Now, he tried out, according to CBS News, tried out for the school's rifle team as a freshman, but didn't make it. But let's have my notes here about this. Now, from all accounts, Crooks was a good student. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. He was a good student. He excelled in math and science, though he wasn't popular, according to fellow classmate Summer Barkley, but didn't see any red flags. No red flags, really. Now, another classmate who sat near him in class, Mark Sigafus, told CBS that he may have been bullied but didn't witness the bullying firsthand. And he lacked the creepiness factor. So you got to be creepy. You got to be a reject. You got to be bullied in school. So Crooks had here we go, folks, had no prior criminal record, no bankruptcies. So he wasn't in trouble with the law, nothing like that. Wasn't in debt. And he was a registered Republican, but, big but here. But he donated $15 to the Democrat Action Group Progressive Turnout Project based in Chicago and was a member of a local sportsman club. But one thing that's missing from this, no mention of his mental state. Was he checked into like a mental institution? Did he have emotional problems as a kid? We may never know. Was he still living with his parents at 20 years old? I think that's a fair question to ask here. Or was he out on his own? And who exactly did he work for? Sounds like this guy didn't have a job. Now, if you saw a picture of this guy, this looks like the reject's reject. Now, apparently he had a group of friends in school, excelled in math and science, all this stuff. But this is starting to sound like the narrative of all these other shooters that we saw. They weren't known to police. They didn't have a criminal record. And then it turns out that they had some type of mental problem. We find out about this months later. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but I have a feeling, I have a hunch that it's going to come out that he probably had some emotional problems when he was younger. Just saying. But to see the runaway media have this faux outrage. Now, I'm sure there are some people who have legitimate concerns. I mean, even Biden called Trump. Wish him well. Make sure he's okay, which is what you do, even though you have disagreements. You have to understand something, folks. DC is a club, okay? It's a club. That's what it is. It's a place for the political elite. That's what it's become. But I just thought it was funny. In the midst of all this chaos, it's a serious situation, this attempted assassination, okay? I'm not making light of this. But I think that it was funny that in the middle of all this, they bumped the lectern, the podium, and the Trump campaign sign, is basically fallen off of the lectern of the podium here. The illusion of the presidency. So maybe they proved my point. That maybe this whole idea of having this thing called the presidency isn't the best idea. or having everything located in DC when you can stretch things out a little bit. Now, somebody commented, now I think I did a video about, yeah, I did do a video about this. I think it was my last video. As I said before, you do all these videos, and sometimes you forget what videos you post or when you posted them. But I talked about this person who commented, not going to mention her name to protect the guilty here, about somebody who favors the Confederacy is for Congress expanding itself out. Well, I never said that I necessarily favored the Confederacy. I just said, hey, they had a point here. They aren't evil incarnate here. They had a legitimate argument, some concerns about the government at the time, when at the time in the 1860s, slavery, for example, they had other issues too, not just slavery, but slavery was legally recognized under the U.S. Constitution, so they were doing what, in their minds at the time, was legally acceptable under the U.S. Constitution, or legally recognized under the U.S. Constitution. That's hard for us to understand that now because we live in the 21st century. We're not living in the 1850s or the 1860s. Life was a lot different. The economic and social structure was different. If you had slavery, you also had indentured servitude, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's for another video, another time. But I'm just saying, responding to this person's comment, saying, well, how could you favor Congress expanding itself? Well, I'm not talking about government getting larger. I'm talking about stretching things out to where there's more representation for all these different regions that make up this thing called the United States. Because 500 and some odd people in the Congress is supposed to represent 320 some odd million people. Something just doesn't add up there. That's not real representation. So, hope you enjoyed the video. That's the latest with Trump, this assassination attempt. I'll wish him well. And again, I'm not calling for political violence. I don't believe in it. But I think if you got rid of this thing as known as a presidency, or limited the power of D.C., weren't so focused on D.C., we wouldn't have as much division as we have now. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can follow me on Instagram, #JasonComposes, because I write music in my spare time. Or you can go to X, Culture Confederacy, at Culture Confed1 on X. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out, stay safe, everybody. God bless this thing called the United States. You know how we do it here. This is where the past crashes with the present. Again, no fancy graphics, epic soundtracks, pretty boy camera angles. It's you, me, my smartphone, the news of the day, and this mission to preserve great art, music, history, and culture. Catch you next time. Take care and be safe.